Right, so we're turning to a man who has played for both Real Madrid and Barcelona and Espanol, Spain and Catalonia, and he was voted the best Spanish goalkeeper of the 20th century. We're talking the life and times of Ricardo Zamora, better known as El Divino, and the man behind that famous Copa del Rey save. I'm joined on the line by Dermot Corrigan, who wrote a piece on the goalkeeper in the Blizzard now a few months back. Dermot, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, hey, Enda, looking forward to it.
So Zamora wouldn't be a massively household name. I think people would know who he is, but how famous is he in Spain in comparison?
Yeah, he's pretty much remembered as the best goalkeeper of all time in Spain, or the most famous. Iker Casillas might have more recently might have something to say about that, but generally he is the Spanish goalkeeper over the years. Like the award for the least goals conceded by a goalkeeper in each season in a Liga is called the Zamora, similar to Pichichi for the top scorer. And Zamora is the first. He was kind of like the first celebrity Spanish football player as well. He I guess we'll get into it, but he was much more than just a goalkeeper. Like he was the best known sports person in Spain of the time. He was friends with actors, with politicians, with aristocrats. He lived a good life. He lived an amazing life, really. And for all of that, he would still be pretty well remembered on all sides of Spanish society.
Yeah, so one theme that I'm trying to maybe touch on over the next couple of weeks is the hand in hand in which way in which sport runs with weird times in history, and Zamora really played in probably the weirdest stage of Spanish history in recent memory anyway, and he played during the Civil War and throughout it, and he also lived in exile for a couple of years as well. So his life and his sporting life go hand in hand with the turmoil that Spain was going through at that point in time. But starting off, he grew up in Barcelona and he started his life for Espanol as opposed to Barcelona, did he?
Yeah, he was a bit of a prodigy. Like as a kid, he started to play very young, like as a young teenager, for the men's team of the city's university, and was spotted straight away. So everybody, like football, was only kind of getting going in Spain at that stage. Would have been like just before the 1920s, the 19 teens. So he was called up by Espanol at 15 to play a game, and almost immediately, everybody realized that this kid was an amazing keeper, was the best keeper around. So he, kept goal as they won the Copa del Rey final in 1919, played for Spain at the 1920 Olympics when Spain won a silver medal. And that the 1920 Olympics for Spain was pretty big for their football team. Football became they won the silver medal, as I said, and football became a kind of household sport at that stage. Maybe they became kind of celebrities. It was the first time that Spain had done something collectively as a Spanish team. And he was already, even though he was very young, he was one of the stars of that team.
What was his background in terms of his family life? From what you read, his dad was a doctor or worked in medicine. So was he sort of upper to middle class, or was he very much a working class kid, or where did he lie?
Yeah, like he's as well connected with a time of Spanish history. And again, like I'm more of a football writer than a historian, but this stuff is very interesting to me, and I did as much research as I could trying to find out about it. And at that time, there was a huge amount of immigration into Barcelona, into Catalonia or into the Catalan capital from other parts of Spain. So he would have been fairly typical of middle class people who moved from, I'm not sure which part of Spain, maybe Murcia to Barcelona in order to take advantage of the opportunities, the economic opportunities and the social opportunities that were there at the time. So he would have come from a pretty well-to-do, not a super rich background, but a well-to-do background. His dad worked in medicine. There is some in the sources, as you say, or looking back at the different histories that are written of it, biographies that are written of it, there's a little bit of confusion over his exact circumstances of his father and his mother, and maybe that they weren't together. I'm not sure about that. But he grew up in wasn't lacking for money at the time, but was out of the house playing football from a very early age, and wouldn't have been. There was a thing where his dad wanted him to study medicine, and he actually gave up football for a little bit in order to study medicine, but he couldn't stay away from it. And from his personality and from everything that had to do with football, when he started getting the recognition and the money as well that came with it, then he was sure that football was the career for him.
Yeah, and I suppose the reason I ask is because, again, with these regimes and with the fascism that was going on, and also the communism that was fighting against that in the country, his social standing kind of comes in and plays a role in what happens in his life. But after the 1920 Olympics, that's when he really started to just become a household name when it comes to it. And I suppose celebrity status back then is a lot different than what it is now.
Yeah, like he was well aware of his worth as well, which I think fits into what you're saying there. Like at that stage, Barca or football players in general were, it was kind of moving towards professionalization in Spain, but La Liga hadn't really started. Well, La Liga hadn't started yet until 1928, 29. So the football was still kind of getting going, and the players wouldn't have been paid very much or mightn't have been that well known outside of their own club. But lots of people were going to the games, and after the 1920 World Cup, especially, the attendances grew a lot. So football was generating a lot of money, but the players weren't getting it, and he wasn't having any of that. If there was money around, then he felt, and fair enough, he deserved it and he wanted to get it. So that led to him turning down an offer from Hans Gamper, the famous kind of founder of Barcelona, who was the vice president then, to move to Espanol, who were even at that stage as well, it wasn't quite as obvious as it is now, but Espanol were the team of the kind of immigrants, the people, or the migrants, the people who had moved into Barcelona from other cities, so more of a working class as well kind of idea around Espanol. But they had the money. Yeah, Barcelona would have been more kind of seen as cosmopolitan, international, whereas Espanol were working class, people who worked in the factories that maybe the Barcelona directors owned. Again, that's quite a simplification of the situation, but that's the idea. But Espanol had the money to sign him, and they attracted him across the divide, and he started to play for Espanol.
At this stage, I'm not sure how deep you went in terms of the newspaper reports, but are we seeing an insight into what Zamora's political standing is? Because I think that's where things start to get interesting, and there's two sides playing him at one point in time. So he grew up in Catalonia. He played for a Catalonia 11 as well at one point, but he also plays for Spain and says that he's really proud to be a Spaniard. So where does he fall in at this stage where he's playing for Barcelona and moving to Espanol, and he's still living in what would have been a Catalan stronghold?
Yeah, I think he would be very or again, this is the impression that you get from looking back on it and reading some of the stuff that he wrote as well later in his life, that he wasn't that interested in politics. Like he wouldn't have seen that big of a divide that you have to be either Catalan or Spanish, or you have to be either, like, I don't think he got involved in, or he tried to stay as much as possible. It wasn't that easy at that time, but he tried to stay as much as possible out of organized politics. And he was on the side of Zamora more than on the side of Catalans or Spanish or left or right or whatever. And he was opportunist, you could say, to an extent, or you could just say, he was making the most of his situation for himself, and why not? But people maybe over time tried to attach their own ideas to him, or use him as a symbol for a cause that they wanted to promote. But he didn't really want to get into that. If someone paid him money, he would go along and be there. He tried as much as possible to not to be used by other people for their own means, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're talking about something that happened in 1930s, and over the last 5-10 years, there's definitely been a rise in Catalan pride and a push for that, and we've seen like Pep Guardiola wearing the flower on his jumper in the Premier League, and the tension between Piqué and Ramos and all these things, and you do see that as well, that certain newspapers who are falling either way are attaching these players, but maybe like Zamora, they actually don't want to play on that as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. Like, Piqué is the most obvious one, who used to get a lot of abuse from, abuse is probably a bit strong, but he was whistled while playing for Spain. He'd won the World Cup with Spain, won a Euros as well. But because he hadn't even positioned himself, Piqué was very kind of clever about it, or nuanced about it in what he said on that what I remember him saying, Annie, was that he was in favor of Catalan people's right to decide their own future, but not necessarily in favor of Catalonia seceding from Spain and leaving and becoming its own independent country. Now, those type of nuances, to me, that sounds very sensible, that even that it would be difficult to argue with that, but those type of nuances went over a lot of people's heads, or people didn't want to get involved in nuances. They were just more interested in pushing whatever ideas they had beforehand, using him as a symbol. So either people in Catalonia were like, Piqué's on our side, the Catalan nationalists, look how badly he's getting treated by Madrid. That's how all Catalan people get treated badly. Again, a very simplistic way of looking at it. Or the more conservative or nationalist people in Madrid or around Spain who didn't want Catalonia to leave, or who were, again, it's a complicated one for me to get into, but they were, it was easy enough for them to whistle Piqué to show how they were real Spanish patriots, to be very simplistic about it.
Yeah, and I suppose it just comes into the whole how football is intrinsically linked with these, because people are obsessed with football and they like to link their political ideals to it and hope that their heroes fall into whatever bracket they fall into. But 1936, that's when it gets really interesting for Ricardo Zamora. Tell us about the German press and what they were reporting at that stage.
Yeah, just make sure I get it right for 1930s. Yeah, there was a FIFA Congress in Berlin in 1936, and that was just after Zamora had made this miraculous last-minute save in the Copa del Rey final, which had photos of which had gone around the world. He was playing for Madrid at that stage against his former club Barcelona, and they won the final. And it was reported that he had died, that just 35, that he had died because the civil war had just broken out, and there was chaos in Spain. People within Spain and especially outside of Spain had no real idea of what was going on. There were people, there was violence going on for sure. People were dying, and it was reported by Jules Rimet, the FIFA president at the Congress, or he asked the people, the delegates from different countries present there, to stand up in memory of a deceased sportsman, a remarkable player, and a great representative of our sport. So everybody stood up and passed on their respects, because he was super famous. He was like one of the most famous footballers in the world at the time. Everybody knew who he was, and for him to have passed away was a huge event, and was something that they marked. Within Spain as well, people were wondering what had happened to him, and it was reported that he had been, it was an eyewitness account claiming that his body had been seen in a ditch and that he'd been assassinated by communists. That was seized upon by the fascist side, saying that our nation's goalkeeper was a victim or a martyr of the Marxists. And there was even a mass held for the repose of his soul in Valladolid, which was held by the rebels at that side. So he'd become while he wasn't dead, people thought he was dead. He'd become a kind of used by propagandists on the rebel side, on the right wing side, to further their cause, or to win over the people, because he was, so many football fans loved him both in Madrid and in Barcelona, that if they could claim him for their side, then it was going to be very useful for propaganda. But it turned out that he was neither dead nor abroad, as another story in Mundo Deportivo put it in Catalonia. But he'd gone into hiding because he was worried about what might happen to him because of his associations on all sides. It was a time, especially, where you had to be, and this maybe goes to the crux of the story that I wrote, that you had to identify yourselves with either left or right, and he didn't identify with either. He didn't want to be pigeonholed onto either side, or to have to see things in such a simplistic way. And when a war breaks out and people are taking sides, that's a very dangerous position to be in.
Yeah, and at this point in time, he was also the sports editor of which would have been the Catholic Church newspaper, almost right wing at this stage. Would it be correct saying?
Yeah, for sure. Like, it would have Catholic Church associated with Franco, with the rebels, with the people who were trying to take down the left wing government, which was, and did take down the left wing government. So he liked the idea of being a sports editor of a paper. He was friends with some of the people who ran the newspaper, is my understanding of it. But I don't think he wasn't writing editorials on a political line. He was just a sports guy. It happened to be the newspaper, and as a journalist who's written for different people over the years, you don't want to be particularly associated sometimes with everything that's written in the paper that you write for. So I can understand that, but I can also understand why people would, again, if you're looking at it in a simplistic straight line kind of way, why that would be troublesome for him in that moment.
One interesting point of his life, and something you kind of touched on there, was how he was for Zamora, and he was very much a self-standing man who was made the most of his celebrity status. So what would it have been considered in Spain back then for somebody to be pushing products? Like, would it have been accepted, or would it have been something that would have been frowned upon as sort of a capitalistic way of thinking?
Yeah, I don't be going on my impression on that, but I don't think he was super popular. I don't think people had maybe some really ideological people might have had a problem with it, but the vast majority of football fans, or my take on it anyway, the vast majority of people in Spain weren't that pushed about it. He was super popular. He advertised Anise. He was in films. People went to see those films. It wasn't a case that he was just right wing people, if you can be that simplistic about it, went to those films. Everybody would have liked those films. Everybody drank the anise. It didn't really cause a problem for him, I think, until the political conflict got so tense and so bad that then people started to look for reasons not to like somebody. But I don't think that, again, this is just my personal view, I don't think that it was such a case that everybody was like, Zamora, that's a capitalist, I won't support his football team. Like Zamora is a great goalkeeper. He's an interesting guy. He's a charismatic guy. And maybe I don't agree with every political thing that he says, or I don't agree with the newspaper that he writes for. But did you see that save at the weekend? Like, thank God they wouldn't have said thank God, but it's isn't it great that he's our goalkeeper for Spain, and we all support the Spanish football team.
The thing that caught my eye about this story when I was reading it was your line about how he was a man that was awarded and arrested by both sides. So 1936, things are getting a little bit heated between the two sides. There's also a lot going on over in the other side of Europe. What leads to Zamora's arrest?
Yeah, so he went in hiding when the war broke out, but he was picked up by militias who were like the Spanish Madrid. And again, I'm not a historian, but my understanding of it is the Madrid was in total chaos at the time. But it started to be organized by volunteer squads who were in support of the government of the time, which was being attacked by the rebels. So Zamora was brought to a prison within Madrid in October 1936, and the other prisoners would have been people on the right side, or people who were worried who were going to be rebels, or who might try to take down the government. So, but Zamora wasn't really one of them. He was kind of stuck in the middle. So he was popular both with the prisoners, the right wing guys who were in the prison, and also with the left wing guards who were looking after him. And eventually, he was freed from the prison, or he was able to get out of the prison, and he escaped to. Still wasn't really safe for him to be hanging around in Madrid, so he escaped to France. He spent a couple of years in France, where he played football. Lived a decent enough life on the Riviera in France as well, amongst a community of other refugees. Now he was living amongst a kind of left-wing environment. He was friends with those guys as well, got on with those guys, and that didn't sit well as the conflict went on in Spain, and as the right-wing side, the General Franco's troops won the war and took over. Suddenly it wasn't good that the symbol of the Spanish football team, the best Spanish goalkeeper, maybe the best Spanish player, most famous Spanish footballer, was not playing his part in the side which had won the war. So he was persuaded to come back to Spain and came back to Madrid. But again, there were still people there who he wasn't very popular with some of the people there. So he ended up in prison again. So he had been imprisoned by the left wing side at the start of the war. Then when he came back from France, he was imprisoned by the right wing side. Again, it didn't last too long, and he got out of prison soon after it. People just didn't really know what to do with him. Like he didn't fit into again, I'll go back over this, but he didn't fit in on the left or on the right. So both sides imprisoned him, both sides let him out, because he wasn't that he had actually really done anything wrong, but they just didn't really trust him, or he wasn't really fitting into what they thought as the right behavior to take, or the right stance to take in that minute. But the Franco regime wanted to keep him on their side. So once he got out of the prison, he was given a job really coaching the Atletico Madrid team, which at that stage was called Atletico Aviación, was the team of the Air Force. And he was the manager of that team, which turned out to have with the support of the regime, got a lot of really good players on their side, and were a successful team in the post-war period.
And then he goes on to manage Spain as well. Was he as good a manager as he was a goalkeeper?
No, I don't think so. Again, yeah, I'm more comfortable speaking about this than the political part of it, but I don't think so. He was very charismatic guy. He was a leader of men in a way, but I don't think he was that into like the nitty gritty of the tactics. Training every day wasn't kind of what he really wanted to get involved in. So he was the the league with Atletico because they had by far the best players in the league. They were able to take a lot of the players who had signed up to the war were on the Franco side, which won the war, were then kind of moved from the army into the football team to play for Atletico. Then as things kind of went back to normal and as other teams got stronger as well, they didn't win the league. And then, he had time as in charge of the Spanish national team. He went to Colombia, I think, as well. He got an offer to go to Colombia, got more money for there. So he left Spain to go there, which, again, didn't go down so well with some people in Spain. Was the Espanol coach later on in his career. But again, he was better as being a celebrity, being an ambassador, more a Bobby Charlton type figure than Alex Ferguson type figure, I think it's fair to say.
Right. And just before we finish up on Zamora, what's his impact then on Spanish football in your opinion?
He's had an unusual impact on Spanish football in that he is a super famous player. Zamora, as I said, the trophy for the best goalkeeper every year in the Liga is named after him. People still remember his look, like the hat that he wore, the jersey that he wore. He made a huge impact as a player, but because he's not, he's not really associated as a superhero of Madrid. He's not like Alfredo Di Stefano or Gento, or more recently people like Michel or Butragueño, who won big trophies with Madrid, even in recent years, Zidane or Figo or Cristiano Ronaldo. He's not in that line of Madrid heroes, and neither is he at Barcelona, because he went on to play for Madrid as well later in his career and play for Spain. He's not remembered in the Barcelona club history as one of the outstanding figures of their history. He might be the best goalkeeper to have played for either club. You could argue, again, it's going back a long time, so it's different to compare over the years, but he's, the top goalkeeper of each of their era who played for both clubs, but isn't remembered as a superhero of either Madrid or Barcelona, again, because he was so difficult to pigeonhole or didn't fit into the narratives or the stories that both clubs now want to tell about their histories.
Yeah, I think that's the key phrase, is that it's the story that they want to tell. I think if anybody's read Sid Lowe's book about the fear and loathing in Real Madrid against Barcelona, then you'll get a good insight into the sort of propaganda that the two clubs like to put across to build their brand, what they are. Just before we finish up, then La Liga this year, it's almost wide open, mainly because most teams are pretty bad in it. Is that the impression I'm getting from?
Yeah, it's been a very strange season. There are still very strange times that we're all living through in Spain for sure. And neither Barcelona nor Madrid are going through a good moment. Even if COVID hadn't hit, and even if things had gone on as normal, it wasn't a vintage Madrid team last year or a vintage Barcelona team. Barcelona had all the chaos with the Messi saying he wanted to leave, the president resigning in October. That still hasn't really been sorted. Still huge financial problems at the club. Koeman is doing a decent enough job. He's introducing young players who've done very well. Pedri is playing phenomenally well at 18 years of age. Ansu Fati before he got injured as well. They are already kind of moving through their transition, but they're very inconsistent. When Messi plays really well, they can beat anybody. If Messi's not on his game, their teams can take advantage of it and take advantage of the problems in the squad. Madrid as well still have that old guard of Benzema, Kroos, Sergio Ramos, who are still, again, on their day, can beat anybody. They've beaten Atletico and beaten Barcelona in the Liga, but they can also lose to Alaves, or they drew at the weekend at Osasuna. So Atletico Madrid are coming through as not a super team, or not packed with individual quality really, but the most consistent team. Luis Suarez is scoring a lot of goals for them up front. He's been settled in very well for them and is making the difference. So Atletico, they're not as good maybe as the Atletico teams of 3 or 4 years ago that should really have won a Champions League, but they're the most consistent team, and they look like favourites to win it at the minute.
And they signed Moussa Dembele as well on loan, didn't they, from Lyon?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's been fully confirmed yet, but it looks like he's definitely going to arrive. And they needed a striker like Diego Costa. They let go. He injury problems and just wear and tear. He wasn't able to work and personality as well. It didn't really work as Suarez's backup. So the idea is that Dembele will come in, be able to play either alongside Suarez or more likely to come on later in games when Suarez maybe doesn't want to last the 90 minutes in every game, or if you want to rest him in cup games and stuff like that. And the idea that he can use his his pace, his physicality, scored a lot of goals for Celtic and for Lyon as well. So they're hoping that that'll work out well for them for the next 6 months.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how he gets on at a higher standard again, because it was phenomenal for Celtic, and again he pushed on again under Lyon. So I do hope that he kind of burst through onto the scene at Atletico. Just one final one that has to be asked: Lionel Messi, he's free to talk to clubs in January. Any signs of him leaving Barcelona?
Really difficult to know. Everybody's fascinated by it, talking about it. His most recent interview, he did a very good interview on Spanish TV with a kind of cultural interviewer, not a cultural political interviewer, not a football guy. And he said loads of times in that interview that he's going to make his mind up at the end of the season. So it depends a lot on who wins the presidential elections, how the team goes over the rest of the season. Excuse me. Will make a big impact on his decisions. I don't think he knows himself. That seemed to come across from it. He doesn't really know what to do. But he's looked a lot happier over the last couple of weeks. I think he gets on well with Koeman. Koeman is maybe not the ideal manager for Barcelona in a normal season, or for any top club in a normal season, but is doing a pretty good job in these really strange circumstances. It seems to have connected with Messi, and the emergence of people like Pedri, like Ansu Fati, who are on the same wavelength as Messi, who Messi can see is going to help Barca to win trophies over the next couple of years if they continue to progress, makes it probably more likely that he will stay. But again, it depends on what kind of offers he gets, and what happens over the next. Things are pretty crazy at the moment. Trying to predict what's going to happen in the future is difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I was watching the take the ball, pass the ball documentary over the weekend again, and just watching the development of that great Barcelona team was it makes you ponder for what could have been if they had continued on, but it also makes you realize the impact that the president has on the club, because that's exactly what's gone wrong at Barcelona over the last couple of years. But Dermot Corrigan, fascinating stuff as always. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Cool. Cheers, Enda. Really